My life imploded 6 months ago when I discovered James, my husband, was having an affair with a young intern from his office. Looking back, I should have noticed the warning signs, the late nights at work, suspicious text messages, and his sudden enthusiasm for weekend shifts. But when you're busy raising an 8-year-old, even the most obvious red flags can blur into the background of daily chaos. I'm Elena, and at 34, I never imagined I'd be rebuilding my life as a single mother. Yet, here I am, tucked away in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, just a 15-minute drive from my parents' house. Moving closer to them seemed logical at the time, despite our historically complicated relationship. The transition wasn't all bad. I landed a position at a respected marketing agency fairly quickly. The pay is decent, and surprisingly, I genuinely enjoy the work. The only catch is the occasional business trip. Nothing major, just a day or two here and there. That's when things get interesting with my parents. The first time I asked them to watch Alex during a business trip, you'd think I'd requested a kidney donation. Dad actually rolled his eyes and muttered under his breath, while Mom crossed her arms and declared, "We're retired, Elena. We didn't plan on being full-time babysitters at our age." "I know, and I'll compensate you," I replied, my cheeks burning with humiliation. Whatever professional nannies charge, plus extra. It was like flipping a switch. Suddenly, they were willing to consider it, though they made sure to remind me what an enormous imposition it was. The real kicker? My older sister Rebecca can drop off her kids anytime she wants, and my parents practically throw a parade. Just last week, she showed up unannounced with her 2 children, each from a different ex-boyfriend, and Mom couldn't contain her joy. "Oh, my precious angels," she cooed while Dad rushed to retrieve the cookie jar. Meanwhile, when I bring Alex over, they act like I'm dropping off a bag of contaminated laundry. "Alex, sweetie, go play in the guest room," Mom said during our last visit, then turned to me with that expression I've grown to despise. "Now, Elena, Dr. Anderson's son just got divorced. He's a surgeon, you know. Very successful." "Mom, I'm not interested in being set up right now," I responded, for what felt like the 1,000th time. "I need to focus on Alex and my career." "That's your problem, Elena," Dad chimed in from his recliner. "You're too picky." No wonder James left. The irony is staggering. Rebecca's never maintained steady employment, has 2 children out of wedlock, and currently survives on her new boyfriend's income. Yet somehow, I'm the family disappointment because my husband cheated on me. "Have you thought about what I mentioned regarding Dr. Mitchell's son?" Mom asked yesterday while returning Alex to me after a brief business trip. "He's only been divorced twice, and the second one wasn't even his fault. I've learned to let their comments slide off my back mostly. What choice do I have? They're Alex's grandparents, and despite their obvious favoritism toward Rebecca and her kids, I need their help. But in the quiet hours after Alex falls asleep, I find myself wondering how my own parents can treat me this way, how they can scrutinize every decision I make while turning a blind eye to Rebecca's chaos. I woke up one Tuesday morning feeling like I'd been hit by a freight train. My throat felt like sandpaper, my head was pounding, and even lifting my arm seemed to require superhuman effort. Alex was already up, sprawled on the living room floor watching his favorite cartoon show. "Mommy, you sound weird," he said, his dark eyes filled with worry as he studied my face. "Are you okay?" I tried to smile, but even that hurt. "Just a little cold, buddy. Nothing to worry about." After calling in sick to work, one faced my next challenge: what to do with Alex. I couldn't risk him catching whatever had knocked me down, so I grabbed a medical mask from the bathroom cabinet and dialed my parents' number. "I'm really sick," I croaked into the phone. "Could you watch Alex for a couple of days until I'm better?" The silence that followed seemed to stretch for an eternity before Mom finally responded, "Well, you know our rates, Elena, and we'll need the money up front this time." I wanted to scream. Who demands advance payment from their sick daughter to watch their own grandson? But I bit my tongue and made the transfer immediately. What choice did I have? After dropping Alex off, I crawled back into bed, hoping some rest would kick whatever this was. But as the hours ticked by, I only got worse. By evening, it felt like an elephant was sitting on my chest. Each breath became a struggle, and the room started spinning whenever I tried to stand. When black spots began dancing in my vision, I knew this wasn't just a cold. My hands trembled so violently I could barely dial 911. The next few hours dissolved into a blur of sirens, white corridors, and medical jargon being tossed around over my head. Finally, a doctor in blue scrubs appeared at my bedside, his expression grim as he held up my chest X-ray. "Severe pneumonia," he said. "You'll need to stay in the hospital for at least 2 weeks." 2 weeks? My heart started racing. What about Alex? What about work? I managed to call my boss first, who was surprisingly understanding about the situation. But when I called my parents, that's when everything truly fell apart. "Mom, I'm in the hospital," I wheezed into my phone. "The doctors say I need to stay for at least 2 weeks. Could you please absolutely not?" Mom's shrill voice sliced through my explanation like a knife. "We're going on a trip in 3 days. Your father, me, Rebecca, and the kids. It's all arranged. We're not canceling our plans just because you can't handle your responsibilities as a mother." The hospital room seemed to shrink around me as I processed her words. My own mother was choosing a vacation over her sick daughter and grandson. "Mom, please," I begged, my voice cracking from both emotion and illness. "I'll pay you double what you usually charge for watching Alex. I know it's an inconvenience, but I'm really sick." The silence stretched out again, and I could picture Mom sitting in her favorite armchair, twirling that strand of gray hair she always fidgets with when she's calculating something. "Well, your father and I paid $5,000 for this trip," she finally said, her voice taking on that familiar business-like tone she uses when she thinks she has the upper hand. "If you can pay us $10,000 to cover our expenses and the inconvenience, we'll consider canceling." The oxygen monitor beside my bed started beeping faster as my heart rate spiked. $10,000? I felt like I was trapped in some bizarre nightmare where my mother had turned into a hostage negotiator and my son was the hostage. "Mom, that's insane," I wheezed, struggling to catch my breath. "You know I don't have that kind of money right now. I'm a single mother with a mortgage." "Then I suggest you figure something out," she snapped. "Because if you don't pick up Alex in 3 days, I'm putting him outside. I'm not missing this trip, Elena. You always do this, create drama, and expect everyone to drop everything for you." The line went dead. I stared at my phone in disbelief, then immediately tried calling back. No answer. I tried again. Straight to voicemail. Again, nothing. My own mother had blocked my number while I lay in a hospital bed, fighting to breathe. The reality of my situation crashed over me like a tidal wave. I was truly alone in this city. All our relatives lived scattered across the country. Aunt Lucy in Florida, Uncle Mike in Texas, Cousin Rachel in Michigan. Having only moved back 6 months ago, I hadn't had time to build any meaningful friendships. Sure, I had work colleagues, but who asks an office acquaintance to take their child for 2 weeks? In desperation, I did something I'd been avoiding. I called James. My hands shook as I dialed, and not just from the fever. "Elena?" He sounded surprised. "What's wrong?" I swallowed my pride and explained the situation, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know it's a lot to ask, but could you possibly take Alex for a couple of weeks? I'm in the hospital with pneumonia, and my parents, I can't." He cut me off. "Catherine's due to give birth any day now. We're actually heading to the hospital tomorrow for the scheduled C-section." Catherine, his new wife, the 27-year-old who'd been his assistant, the one he'd left us for. And now she was giving birth to their new baby while I lay alone in a hospital bed with nowhere to send our son. I stared at my phone's contact list. There was one name I'd been avoiding, one last possible lifeline, but just seeing it made my stomach churn. Margaret, my former mother-in-law. We hadn't spoken since the divorce 6 months ago, and even before that, our relationship had been rocky at best. Margaret had never thought I was good enough for her precious James. She'd made that clear from day one, with her backhanded compliments and subtle criticisms. "Oh, you're working in marketing? How interesting." I always thought James would end up with someone in a more substantial profession. That kind of thing. After the divorce, she'd cut all contact. No surprise there. She'd probably been thrilled when James traded me in for a younger model. But right now, she was my only hope. My finger hovered over her name for what felt like hours, the oxygen mask fogging up with each shaky breath. Finally, I pressed call before I could talk myself out of it. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Elena? Margaret's voice held surprise and something else I couldn't quite identify. Is everything all right? Just hearing her voice, that familiar, properly modulated tone that had so often delivered subtle jabs at my parenting, my career, my everything, made my eyes well up with tears. Margaret, the first started, my voice breaking. The whole story came tumbling out between suppressed sobs and wheezing breaths. The pneumonia, the hospital, my parents' ultimatum, James's refusal to help. By the end, I was practically hyperventilating, and a nurse had to come adjust my oxygen flow. The silence that followed felt endless. I braced myself for rejection, for some cutting remark about how this proved I couldn't handle things on my own. "I'll be there tomorrow," Margaret said firmly. "Text me your apartment address and your parents' address. I'll pick up Alex and stay at your place with him until you're better." With trembling fingers, I sent her the information. For the first time since being admitted to the hospital, I felt like I could breathe a little easier, and it wasn't because of the oxygen mask. The next morning, my phone rang again. This time it was my mother, her voice dripping with irritation. "When are you coming to get your son?" she demanded. "He's being impossible, and we have packing to do." I took a deep breath, summoning what little strength I had. "My former mother-in-law is coming to pick him up today." The snort my mother let out was so loud it crackled through the phone speaker. "Your ex-mother-in-law? Really, Elena? You couldn't find anyone better than that woman?" Before I could respond, she'd hung up. I lay back against my pillows, wondering how my cold, critical former mother-in-law had just proved to be more of a mother than my own. The first photo arrived just hours after Margaret picked up Alex. My little boy was grinning at the camera, chocolate ice cream smeared across his face, looking happier than he had in weeks. "Someone wanted a sundae after lunch," the caption read. I found myself smiling, despite the pain in my chest. Throughout the day, more photos kept coming. Alex doing his homework at the kitchen table, helping to make dinner, proudly showing off a pillow fort he'd built in the living room. Each snapshot was like a tiny piece of home reaching through the sterile hospital walls. "Look what Grandma Margaret got me," Alex's excited voice came through in a video message that evening. He was proudly displaying a new dinosaur puzzle. The camera panned to show Margaret sitting cross-legged on my living room floor, puzzle pieces scattered around her, looking nothing like the proper society woman I'd known for years. The days passed more easily knowing Alex was in good hands. I focused on my recovery, doing breathing exercises and following every instruction from my doctors. Finally, after a week of treatment, they cleared me for visitors. The sound of running feet echoed down the hospital corridor before Alex burst into my room. His face lit up with joy. "Mommy." He threw himself carefully onto my bed, mindful of the fourth lines, just as Margaret must have warned him to be. "We brought you some real food," Margaret said, holding up a thermal bag. "Hospital food isn't fit for recovery." She unpacked containers of homemade soup, fresh bread, and what looked like my favorite lemon squares, though I'd only mentioned liking them once, years ago, at a family gathering. As Alex chatted excitedly about his week, I watched Margaret. She was different somehow, softer around the edges, the perpetual criticism absent from her expression. She asked about my treatment, actually listened to my answers, and seemed genuinely concerned about my well-being. Their visits became a daily bright spot. Margaret would bring something new each time. Books, magazines, more home-cooked food. She'd tell me funny stories about Alex's adventures at home while he played with the toys she'd brought him. During one visit, while Alex was absorbed in his new coloring book, Margaret grew quiet. She seemed to be wrestling with something. "I owe you an apology, Elena," she finally said, her voice low. "The way I treated you all those years. I was wrong. I nearly dropped the soup spoon I was holding." In all the years I'd known her, I'd never heard Margaret admit to being wrong about anything. "I've seen who my son really married now," she continued, a shadow crossing her face. "That woman, all she cares about is spending James's money. 3 different designer handbags in 1 week, and the way she talks to him." She shook her head. "You were good for him, Elena. You loved him for who he was, not what he could buy you." I was too blind to see it then. As I watched her help Alex with his coloring, I realized that sometimes family isn't about blood or marriage certificates. Sometimes it's about who shows up when you need them most, who puts their own life on hold to take care of your child, who brings you soup and apologizes when they've been wrong. While I was still in the hospital, my phone buzzed with a social media notification. My sister had tagged our parents in some photos from their beach resort. There they were, all smiles and sunburns, cocktails in hand, the kids building sandcastles. The caption read, "Family is everything." I actually laughed out loud when I saw it, startling the nurse who was checking my vitals. The irony was almost too perfect. Family is everything posted by the same people who had demanded $10 to look after their sick daughter's child, the same people who had threatened to put their own grandson out on the street. When I was finally discharged, Margaret and Alex were waiting at my apartment. They'd cleaned the entire place, stocked the fridge, and even hung up a Welcome Home Mommy banner that Alex had made himself. I hugged Margaret tight, trying to convey everything I couldn't put into words. "Thank you," I managed to say, "for everything. That's what family is for," she replied simply, and I felt the weight of those words. How different they sounded coming from her compared to my own parents' empty version. Getting back to normal life took time. I found a wonderful babysitter named Rosa, who Alex absolutely adored when I had to travel for work. I didn't even consider calling my parents anymore. Why subject Alex to people who saw him as a burden when Rosa treated him like her own grandson? My parents tried calling a few times, but I let it go to voicemail. What was there to say? They'd shown me exactly where I stood in their hierarchy of importance, somewhere below a beach vacation and $10. Margaret and I talked regularly, at least once a week, sometimes more. She'd FaceTime with Alex, send care packages, and always seemed genuinely interested in our lives. It was the kind of maternal relationship I'd always wished I had with my own mother. Then, 5 months after the hospital incident, Margaret called with an unexpected proposition. "My brother Daniel is looking for someone with your exact qualifications for his company," she said, an excited note in her voice. "I mentioned you to him, and he looked up your work portfolio online. He's very impressed." I sat up straighter in my chair. "The salary is double what you're making now," she continued. "And before you ask about Alex, I'd love to watch him while you're at work. I'm retired now, and this way he'd have his grandmother nearby." My mind was spinning with possibilities. Double my current salary, a fresh start in a new state, Alex having a grandmother who actually wanted to spend time with him. 2 weeks later, Alex and I were packed and ready to go. I didn't tell my parents or Rebecca we were leaving. They'd figure it out eventually, but by then we'd be long gone, starting our new life with the family that had chosen us. The move to Boston turned out to be exactly what we needed. My new role as marketing director at Daniel's company challenged me in ways my old job never had. The team was collaborative, the projects were exciting, and for the first time in my career, I felt truly valued. Alex blossomed in his new school, making friends quickly and bringing home excellent grades. He joined the robotics club and started taking piano lessons, something he'd always wanted to try but we'd never had the money for before. Margaret became a fixture in our lives, showing up for school performances, helping with science projects, and hosting weekly family dinners. She even took Alex for weekend sleepovers so I could occasionally have time to myself, something my parents had never done without demanding payment. We found a cozy apartment in a family-friendly neighborhood, close enough to Margaret that Alex could ride his bike to her house, but far enough that we maintained our independence. Life fell into a comfortable rhythm, filled with the kind of everyday joy I'd started to believe wasn't possible anymore. One evening, as I watched Alex and Margaret baking cookies in our kitchen, both of them covered in flour and laughing about some inside joke, I realized something profound. Sometimes losing what you thought was everything can lead you to something better. The family you're born into isn't always the family that's best for you. And sometimes the people who hurt you the most do you a favor by pushing you toward the people who will love you best. 2 years can change everything. As I sit in my newly purchased home, a charming colonial with a backyard where Alex practices soccer, I barely recognize the woman I was back then. The one who felt trapped, who thought she needed her parents' conditional help to survive. Alex, now 10, has grown into a confident, kind-hearted boy who makes the honor roll every semester. His room is filled with science fair trophies and art projects, and his latest obsession is building elaborate structures in Minecraft. Margaret helped him set up a small vegetable garden in our backyard, and they spend weekends tending to their tomatoes and herbs together. I was recently promoted to Executive Vice President of Marketing, and Daniel keeps hinting at a partnership track in my future. The salary is more than I ever dreamed possible, allowing me to start a college fund for Alex and even take him on his first trip to Disney World last summer. Then last week, after 2 years of silence, my phone rang with a familiar area code. "Elena, it's Mom." The voice on the other end sounded strained, desperate. "We need your help." Of course it was about Rebecca. It's always about Rebecca. "She's gone," Mom continued, her voice cracking. "She ran off with some man she met online, just packed a bag and left. She didn't even say goodbye to the kids, just left a note saying she needed to find herself." I sat down at my kitchen counter, watching through the window as Alex and Margaret harvested vegetables from their garden. "The children have been with us for 3 weeks now," Mom went on. "Your father and I aren't as young as we used to be, and kids are so expensive these days. The food, the clothes, the school supplies." I could see where this was heading. "What exactly do you want from me, Mom?" "Well," she said, her voice taking on that familiar manipulative tone, "you are their aunt. We thought you could send us some money every month to help with expenses. It's the least you could do for family." I couldn't help it, I laughed. A real, genuine laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside. "The least I could do for family?" I repeated. "Like when you demanded $10,000 to watch your own grandson while I was hospitalized? Like when you threatened to put a 6-year-old child out on the street?" "That was different," Mom spluttered. "We had plans." "No, Mom. You had a choice. You chose a beach vacation over your sick daughter and grandson. You chose Rebecca's drama over my stability. Every single time. And now you're calling me after 2 years of silence, asking for money?" "We're talking about innocent children here, Elena." "Yes, we are. Just like we were talking about an innocent child 2 years ago." "My son, your grandson, when you abandoned him?" "I'm sorry Rebecca left her kids. I truly am. But you raised her to be who she is, and now you get to deal with the consequences." "Well, if you won't help willingly," Mom's voice turned sharp, "we'll just bring the kids to your apartment and leave them there. Then you'll have no choice but to take responsibility." I smiled at her empty threat. "Go ahead, Mom. But good luck finding me. I moved to another state 2 years ago." "You what?" "Where are you?" "That's not your concern," I replied calmly. "You know what they say about karma, Mom? It always comes back around. You and Dad raised Rebecca to believe she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. You enabled her behavior for years while criticizing every move I made. Now you're reaping what you've sown." "Please, Elena," her voice cracked, finally dropping the threatening tone. "We, your parents, we need your help. Funny, I was your daughter when I needed your help, and that didn't seem to matter much. Goodbye, Mom." "Don't call again." I hung up and blocked their number, feeling lighter than I had in years. Through the window, I watched Alex show Margaret the tomato he'd just picked, both of them beaming with pride. This was my family now, not perfect, but real, built on love, respect, and genuine care for each other. Sometimes the universe has a way of showing you what truly matters. Sometimes it takes losing what you thought was everything to find what you actually needed all along. My parents' opinion of me doesn't matter anymore. Their words can't reach me here in this life we've built for ourselves, a life full of love, respect, and real family. The kind that shows up when you need them, no price tag attached. As I join Alex and Margaret in the garden, helping them harvest the vegetables for tonight's dinner, I realize that I'm finally truly home. Story 2, I'm Sophia, and I grew up with the type of privilege that most people can only imagine. Our house was something straight out of a magazine. A well-kept garden, large rooms, and a pool that was the site of innumerable summer celebrations. It was all made possible by my father's business success, which he never allowed us to forget. "Sophia, honey, remember that everything we have comes from hard labor," my father would remark, with that well-known tone of authority and pride in his voice. Even though I was too young to grasp the value of money and was more interested in playing with my cousin Chloe, I would nod and attempt to take in the lesson. Although Chloe was officially my cousin, she was more like my sister, only 1 year my junior. She was the daughter of my father's younger brother, Uncle Mark. Despite the stark difference in our living conditions, our families were united. "Your uncle's family needs our support," my mother would explain any time I saw my father providing financial support. Family looks out for family. She was always the tactful one, averting awkward situations when Uncle Mark took another check from Dad. I shared all of my clothing, secrets, and hopes with Chloe. We'd spend hours in my room planning our futures. "We'll go to college together." Lying on my bed and gazing up at the ceiling, Chloe would say. "After that, we'll share apartments with one another. Additionally, our children will be best friends." Till when? Graduation from high school was drawing near. As expected, my father declared that he would cover the cost of both of our college educations. Mom stood beside him, beaming with pride as he made the announcement at our joint graduation party. "Both my daughters deserve the greatest education possible." Placing his arm over each of us, he stated. I remember how Chloe's eyes welled up with tears of gratitude while I just smiled, taking it for granted. Looking back now, I should have noticed the signs, but back then I was just happy to have my cousin's sister by my side as we packed our bags for college. Together, we were going to face the world. They are like two peas in a pod. We never imagined that everything we believed to be true about our ideal family would be revealed by a wedding present. "This will be fantastic." As we decorated our dorm rooms, which were conveniently across the hall from one another, Chloe shrieked, "We can never be separated, can we, Sophia?" "Nothing, I promised. With all my heart, I mean it. How foolish we were, God. How foolish I was." That's the problem with ideal families, though. Sometimes they are flawless only because we decide not to examine the foundation's fissures too thoroughly. College passed by quickly than I imagined. I was going across the stage to get my graduation before I even realized it. The audience cheered for my family. I felt really elated. I got a job at a marketing company right away after receiving my degree. Everything looked to be falling into place. Almost everything, actually. "Dad, I've been thinking about having my own apartment." Over dinner one evening, I mentioned it. "I've been looking through internet apartment ads since I want to have a place of my own." Right present, the rental industry is booming. With the down payment as well. He interrupted me as I set down this fork, "Sophia, you're an independent lady now. You're doing well. You need to start making money on your own. You received an excellent education from your mother and me. It's time for you to take charge of your own life, though." Mom simply nodded in agreement while sitting there. It seemed as if someone had hit me. That's how I ended myself living in a small one-bedroom apartment with half of my wage going toward rent and my savings growing at an excruciatingly sluggish rate. However, I was determined to demonstrate my independence. Chloe graduated a year later. She revealed her secret as we were celebrating at her favorite restaurant. Jake made a proposal. She flashed a diamond ring and shrieked, "Our wedding is in 4 months." Due to the hectic nature of wedding preparations, 4 months passed quickly. I threw myself into my maid of honor duties, helping Chloe pick out everything from her dress to the table settings. I was very thrilled for her, even if I was having housing issues myself. The wedding day arrived and everything was perfect. The reception was magnificent and the ceremony was lovely. I watched Chloe dance with Jake, both of them glowing with happiness. After that, my dad got up to speak. "Chloe," he started, his voice husky with passion. "Over the years, you have been like a daughter to me. One of the biggest pleasures of life has been seeing you grow up with Sophia." As I sipped my champagne, I grinned. Typical wedding speech material. However, that's why he went on, removing an envelope. "I have a special gift for you. Something with which to begin your new life." For dramatic effect, he paused. "Your very own apartment's keys." I almost let the glass drop out of my grasp. Applause and gasps filled the crowd. Aunt Sarah and Uncle Mark were in tears. Chloe sobbed as she hurried to embrace my dad. "Thank you," into his shoulder. He said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You deserve this. I cherish you as if you were my own daughter." As family members gathered around Chloe and Jake to congratulate them on their amazing gift, I sat there speechless. My mind was whirling. My cousin recently received an apartment from the same father who advised me to be independent. I held my champagne glass tightly, fearing it might break. However, I continued to smile, kept performing my part. After all, it was Chloe's day. I wouldn't cause any trouble. I didn't arrive at my parents' house until precisely 3 days after the wedding. My hands were shaking when I rang the doorbell, but my voice was firm when Dad opened the door. "We must speak," I remarked as I passed him and entered the living room I had known so well for so many joyful times. "What's on your mind, Sophia?" As like he hadn't just placed a bomb on my life, he appeared quite composed as he sat down in his favorite recliner. "Really? Are you going to act as though you're unaware?" Too agitated to sit, I remained standing. "You advised me to support myself, to be self-sufficient, but you simply gave Chloe an apartment like it was nothing. Do you want to elaborate?" Dad sighed as if I were being crazy. "It's different with Chloe. You have more opportunities than she does." "Not the same." "How?" "We attended the same university, received the same education, and you covered the costs. By the way, her family is not wealthy, Sophia. Jake's family isn't well off either. They need help starting their lives, but your uncle cannot afford it." He bent over. "At the current cost, they would never have enough money saved for a home of their own." I let out a sharp laugh. "Beau and I can half the nation rent. Dad, what I'm doing is something they could have done. Like everyone else, work, save money, and rent an apartment. It's mercantile of you." His composed exterior broke as he snapped. "You are not the focus of this. I own this money. I also choose how to spend it. I aid your uncle's family because they need it. Mercantile." I raised my voice. "Money isn't the issue here. It has to do with justice. When you treat your niece better than your own daughter, how does it make you feel? That's sufficient." Mom rushed into the space. "I was completely unaware that she was at home. How dare you dispute your father's decisions? You have no authority to advise him how to spend his money? Oh, so this is acceptable to you?" I looked over at her. "While asking his own daughter to struggle, your spouse is giving an apartment to another woman's daughter." "Young woman, don't take things personally." Anger was red on Mom's face. "Everything has been given for you by your father, and you pay him back like this? With demands and feelings of jealousy?" Now I was virtually yelling. "Do you believe that envy is at play here? Respect is at issue here. About showing the same consideration you give to others, to your own child. Leave now." It was Dad's voice. "Until you are able to express gratitude for all that we have done for you and express regret for this behavior. Leave my house. Thank you." I reached for my handbag. "Additionally, don't worry about helping me out in any other way. I'm not interested in your charity." As I climbed into my car, tears of rage burned in my eyes. The money wasn't the point. It had never been. The double standard was at issue, about my father asking me to get tougher while going out of his way for Chloe. Many things may change in 5 years. They altered nearly every aspect of my situation. I established my career ascending through the ranks at my marketing agency to become a senior account manager. I worked hard to accumulate money, but it was far from enough to cover a down payment in this crazy market. And most significantly, I discovered Michael. It was at a client meeting that he entered my life. We were working with him as our creative director, and something clicked. I knew I had finally found someone who genuinely put me first when he proposed on a random Tuesday night as we were preparing supper. The planning of the wedding got on right away. We decided to go on a date in the early summer, and I approached it with the same tenacity that I used to every other aspect of my life. The outfit was selected, and the location was reserved. Then the most difficult part arrived, the list of guests. Even though choosing who wouldn't be on it wasn't difficult, I spent hours at my kitchen table looking over names and relationships. It had been 5 years since I'd spoken to Chloe or my parents, not since Chloe's offensive Facebook post. "I have an apartment and a husband, so you're simply envious. But you don't have either. Adult up." "Sophia, perhaps you would have both by now if you weren't so entitled. However, I suppose that some people simply cannot bear to watch others prosper." After that, I blocked her. That was simpler, cleaner. I attempted to put the family that had treated me like a second-class daughter behind me, started a new life, and surrounded myself with people who appreciated me. However, even in shattered homes, word spreads quickly. My phone rang when I was at my apartment looking around floral arrangements and trying to decide between peonies and roses. For the first time in 5 years, Dad's name appeared on the screen. As I responded, my hands trembled and my heart sprang into my throat. Sophia. In other ways, his voice sounded older and more worn out. I've heard that congratulations are due. Who informed you? I spoke more steadily than I actually felt. Is it important? You invited me to your wedding, but why didn't you? I could hear the anguish in his voice as he stopped. Your father is me. You should be escorted down the aisle by me. Before I could stop myself, I let out a bitter chuckle. Really? Sophia, do you wish to play the father card now? In fact, I want to know. I cut him off, feeling irresponsible. I had suppressed all of my feelings for the past 5 years, but something about hearing his voice had let them loose. As a wedding present, will you be giving me an apartment? Like you did for Chloe, you know. I believed he had hung up since the stillness on the other end was so long. He cleared his throat at last. You see, recently, business hasn't been fantastic. I am able to provide you with $5,000 for the wedding. It's a really kind present. You ought to be thankful. $5,000. I felt that old, familiar burn of wrath building in my throat after seeing Chloe the entire flat. It seems that certain things remained constant. I appreciate your kindness, Dad. I responded, cynicism leaking from my voice. But don't spend your money. I don't require it. Before he could reply, the line died. I glanced at my phone, my hands quivering slightly, wondering whether that 5-year stillness had been better than this reminder of why I'd broken touch in the first place. The following morning, the notice appeared on my phone. My gut nodded when I opened it because Robert Anderson shared a post that my father didn't often share on social media. My hands began to shake. I never imagined having to write about my own kid in this way. Although the post started, Sophia has now shown her actual nature. As a wedding present, she is requesting an apartment, saying that if I don't cooperate, she won't ask me to her wedding. I'm heartbroken by her mercenary attitude and selfishness. How did the girl I reared fare? Linda was instantly inundated with comments. Helen, thank you. Could she be James's cousin? Some individuals never show gratitude for what they have. People the first didn't even know were contributing. Such gifts are not anything you can demand. A daughter who blackmails her own father is what type of daughter? Before I could stop myself, my fingers were flying over the keyboard. It's a principal issue. For my cousin's wedding, you provided her with an apartment. The same respect should be shown to your own daughter. Or, at the very least, a justification for the disparity in care. However, the remarks continued, each one more judgmental than the previous. I could hardly type because my hands were trembling so much. However, something inside of me had exploded. I started writing after opening a new post. I'd like to share a tale with you all that has been hurting me for years. I started. It concerns a parent who consistently gives his niece preferential treatment over his own daughter. I'll outline the methods. Each birthday. While mine were informal family get-togethers, Chloe was treated to extravagant parties. Dad always took Chloe shopping alone when we traveled overseas as a family, purchasing extras for her. I never did. She always had twice as much money in her pocket as I did. I'm grateful that Dad covered her schooling. He did for both of us. He told me to be independent and gave her an apartment as a wedding present. Instead of having her own first dance at Chloe's wedding, she danced with my father. And what do you know? This whole issue appears suspect the more I consider it. Even if Chloe turned out to be my father's kid, I wouldn't be shocked. Before I could question myself, I pushed post. The words looked back at me from the screen. Our family's meticulously preserved facade was struck by a nuclear weapon. Now there would be no turning back. The fallout of my piece was nuclear. Within hours, my phone was exploding up with calls and texts from every corner of the family. Some relatives instantly said they wouldn't be attending my wedding. First to call was Mom, her voice shrill with rage. How are you able to? Are you aware of the damage you have caused to this family? Your dad is inconsolable. This is not how we brought you up. Next came Dad's call, an outpouring of anger and charges that I was ruining the family name. Before he hung up, he spat. You're dead to me. Sarah's call was especially bitter. What a spiteful little bitch you are, she gave a hiss. You're jealous of my daughter's happiness? How dare you say that? Then Chloe's message appeared. Congratulations on displaying what a crazy, paranoid person you became. I feel sad for your fiancé. He's marrying a deluded lady who invents 6 stories about her own family. As she is unable to cope with not being the focus of attention, you don't need to block me. I'll do it myself. I silently blocked all of the people that sent offensive texts or remarks. I convinced myself it was for the best, but my wedding guest list became much smaller. During the entire experience, only Uncle Mark said nothing, which was strangely consoling in the midst of the mayhem. Preparations for the wedding took up the following 2 months. During it all, Michael was my pillar of support, supporting me when I changed seating charts and canceled playsets. They never questioned my decision to break off my family. Then, one wet night, I heard someone knock on my door. Uncle Mark appeared to have gone days without sleep as he stood there. "Can I come in?" Quietly, he asked. "We must speak." My uncle had never looked so broken in my life. He took a big seat on my couch, hands pressed closely together. His knuckles were white. He started by saying, "Your post about your father's treatment of Chloe. It got me to thinking, genuinely considering everything and keeping in mind." He informed me about my father's constant presence in their home throughout the early years of their marriage, saying that using the bus was unsafe. He would drive Sarah home from work. Even before she became pregnant with Chloe, this was the case. He brought her gifts all the time, costly ones. God, I thought. What an idiot I was. I assumed he was simply being a giving brother. Uncle Mark spoke in a broken voice. His hands were shaking as he went under his jacket and took out an envelope. "I have to be aware. I simply had to know after reading your post." Official lab letterhead was used to print the DNA test results. Hair samples were taken from my father, Chloe, and all 3 of them by my uncle. The results were clear. Only an uncle's link was shown by Uncle Mark's 84% genetic match with Chloe. In contrast, my father's paternal match was 99.99%. Today, Sarah came clean about everything. "Before Chloe was ever created," he muttered, "they had been having an affair for 25 years. We remained there until far past midnight, putting together memories that suddenly made terrifying sense. The extravagant presents, the preferential treatment. My father always appeared to be the first to hear about Chloe's life. During Aunt Sarah's pregnancy, he had insisted on taking her to her doctor's appointments. Sophia, I'm so sorry." As he was leaving, Uncle Mark said, "I ought to have noticed it. Ought should have known." With his shoulders slumped under the burden of 20 years of treachery, I watched him make his way to his car in the rain. I was correct, but for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I didn't feel satisfied. The morning after Uncle Mark's visit changed everything. My phone buzzed with a text message from my mother while I was still processing our conversation. "Sophia, your uncle just departed. We must speak. In an hour, might we meet at Rosemary's Cafe?" She was already there, seated in a booth in the corner, and she didn't appear to have slept. I saw that her hands, which were around an unopened coffee cup, were trembling a little. Before I could even sit down, she added, "I filed for divorce. I just came from the lawyer's office." Her voice cracked. I never knew, even after 25 years of marriage. I never wanted to know. Perhaps Uncle Mark had told her all about it. The DNA test findings and Sarah's confession. The decades-long romance. He'd filed for divorce, too. Incapable of remaining wed to a lady who led such a profoundly deceptive life. Sophia. Mom took my hands and reached across the table. Her eyes were filled with tears. "You deserve my sincerest apologies. All these years, I protected him. I took his side. As I saw him give preference to Chloe, I told myself it didn't matter. I ought to have paid attention to you. I ought to have seen what was taking place in my own house. Mom, I'll finish now. I was furious when you blogged about your suspicions. I believed you were attempting to harm us, seeking retribution. However, you were the only one with the courage to express what we all ought to have noticed. We sobbed and chatted for hours at that cafe, starting the gradual healing process. We drank wine together as Mom informed me about all the warning flags she had disregarded over the years. Every moment that made awful sense all of a sudden. Someone began beating on my door later that night, when I was at home trying to take in all that had transpired. My father was right there when I opened it. His angry face turned crimson. "Are you content now?" Pushing past me into my flat, he yelled. "You've ruined everything!" "Because you couldn't keep your tongue shut. Two families were devastated. I didn't ruin anything," I answered, finding my voice surprisingly steady. "Did you do this? You made a decision 25 years ago that would ruin these families." "I just revealed the reality." His face contorted. "I'm not going to your wedding, though. For the truth, how's that? I had no intention of inviting you." Silently, I said, "It's been years since you were a true father to me. After that, it's resolved." He grinned. "I no longer consider you my daughter." A peculiar serenity descended upon me. "It's okay," I grinned. "In any case, don't you have another daughter?" His shocked expression was nearly hilarious. Before he could answer, I motioned for him to go and open the door. When he did, I left him standing in the hallway and shut it securely behind him. I gave Uncle Mark a call that night. I called his phone, my hands shaking a little. "I want to ask you something, Uncle Mark." I inhaled deeply. "At my wedding, will you accompany me down the aisle?" Before he could say anything, there was a lengthy silence during which I heard him clear his throat many times. "I would be honored, Sophia." Preparations for the wedding took up 2 months. In some ways, the fact that the guest list was less than anticipated added to its specialness. Every attendee who stood with me when it would have been easy to turn a blind eye had chosen truth over cozy falsehoods. The garden setting was lovely, with peonies and white roses all over it. Mom was sitting in the first row, using a tissue to dab at her eyes. I noticed tears in Uncle Mark's eyes as well when he took my arm to lead me down the aisle. My parents' divorce process proceeded fairly swiftly. Dad consented to everything simply to get it over with, according to what Mom subsequently told me. Maybe in an attempt to downplay the issue, Mom got a $200,000 payment after they reached an out-of-court settlement. One afternoon, my mother stopped by my leased apartment where I was writing thank you notes for the wedding. "I want this for you," sliding an envelope over my coffee table, she murmured. A check for the entire settlement amount was inside. "I don't require this cash. I need my daughter to have the house she is entitled to." She grabbed my hand and squeezed it. "Think of that as payback for all the years I didn't defend you. You succeeded." "I did, but we're now making amends." She grinned. "Furthermore, there's no greater use for his money than to give you what he ought to have given you years ago." I'll act as though depositing the check didn't make me cry. Well, Michael and I are hoping to find the ideal apartment, a lovely 3-bedroom apartment with a balcony and enough space to start a family. I always feel like justice has been done when I unlock our front door. Last month, Dad and Aunt Sarah tied the knot. It came to my attention through the family rumor. It seems that they didn't even wait for their divorce papers' ink to dry. Their relationship is no longer a secret. Photos of happy couples abound on their social media, as though the last 25 years of deceit had never occurred. Their accounts are not followed by me. I don't have to. The majority of our family members supported Mom and me. Even those who initially supported Dad were unable to dismiss the information after the DNA findings were made public. Every Sunday, Uncle Mark joins us for dinner. After the betrayal, he is now cautiously re-entering the dating scene. Mom frequently joins us and observes their joint healing. It has been lovely to see a sister-in-law and brother-in-law united by their common suffering. I occasionally think of Chloe late at night, regarding the fact that, in legal terms, she is my half-sister. I wonder whether she was aware of our father's partiality or if she ever had any suspicions about it. However, such ideas no longer keep me up at night. My life is finally my own family, my own house, founded on openness rather than secrecy. Story 3. Hi everyone. Emma is my name. And if you have a moment, I have a tale. That is a bit of a wild ride, one that plunges into a battle for dignity, love, and treachery, prior to plunging into the deep end. Allow me to create the scene and present my small drama's characters to you. Emma, it begins with me, born into a situation that many would consider privileged. All that jazz and a silver spoon? However, I was brought up to value hard effort above freebies, even with the squishy beginning. In the area of engine additives, my dad is the king, a self-made guy who built an empire out of a niche. Mom is also no slouch. Her name became synonymous with elegance after she started a beauty shop business from the bottom up. Despite the possibility of a messy divorce when I was 19, they managed to keep it elegant. dividing everything in two while still managing to stay friends. Mom got married again, but they didn't have any more children than me. Dad remained single, happy with his business and bachelorhood. Enter the Jake stage, correct? My spouse, or as I now consider him, the impetus behind my emotional turmoil. After I got a job teaching music to kids who had more energy than common sense, I got married right out of college. Up until we had a bump in the road, life seemed pretty sweet. Suddenly, Jake's true color began to show through when I became pregnant. Jake casually threw the grenade into our lives one lazy Sunday while he was sprawled out on the couch with his feet up. Emma? Why don't you just quit your job, darling? Keep the infant at home. We'll get by. I almost suffocated on my tea. Jake, quit my work. We can't afford it with just your pay, you know. In addition, I enjoy my job. A sneer played on his lips as he dismissed it with a sweep of his hand. Get them! We're not your typical people. Your father is quite wealthy. With a little assistance from him, we'll be all set. My blood began to boil. Jake, that's not the point. I'm not using my parents' fortune to support our daily needs. Jake wouldn't let it go even after we decided to live within our means. Nor in front of his parents, nor over dinner. He mentioned it once more. Emma is thinking about taking a break from her job. You know, what with the impending kid? Carol, his mother, who has a keen sense of advantage and a sharp tongue, stepped in. Oh, that's fantastic. You two don't need to worry about anything when you're with Emma's family. In an attempt to maintain my composure, I slightly tightened my grip on my fork. In reality, we haven't made any decisions and plan to handle things independently. Thank you. Frank, Jake's father, who never misses a beat, added a laugh. Emma, why choose the difficult route? You could be living comfortably with a little assistance from your parents. Why miss that chance? From then, the discussion with Jake's parents took a turn for the worst, revealing detailed accounts of a life spent on my parents' pay. It seemed like a betrayal with every word. Extending the knife's twist, they failed to notice me. A ticket to a comfortable life was visible to them. As I lay in bed next Jake that night, I couldn't get rid of the loneliness. Jake, do you truly believe that's how we should be depending on my parents? Hoping for some indication that I had misinterpreted the situation, I muttered. With those eyes that used to melt my heart, he turned over and faced me. It's not about necessity, Emma. It has to do with intelligence. We deserve a break, and your parents can afford it. Why not accept it? Well deserved. Long after Jake had fallen asleep, the word continued to reverberate in my mind. It was obvious that our ideals and paths diverged. Wondering how I had missed the indications and where we were going from here, I lay awake and stared at the ceiling. Following that initial argument with Jake around money and pride, I had the hope that we would eventually reconcile. But was I mistaken? Let's go on to the in-law stage. They were left with a unique kind of disarray. Jake's parents weren't exactly the epitome of independence. My family's affluence was like a beacon to them, and they had a knack of spotting a free dinner from a great distance. Frank is talking endlessly about this great business possibility that just required a minimal investment to get off the ground. One evening, as we are all gathered in our small living room, "So, sweetheart Emma," Carol begins, her voice brimming with that artificial sweetness that, given your family's wealth, may give you cavities. You could probably assist us with ease. It is really certain. I made an effort to remain calm. I did, really. Carol, as I previously mentioned, Frank, we are handling our finances on our own. This has nothing to do with my parents' finances. However, Frank, yes, he has the tenacity of a door-to-door salesperson. Emma, please, you wouldn't feel it. To your dad, what are a few thousand? In a weekend, he most likely spends that on golf. I was astounded by the boldness. They had the audacity to treat my family's hard-earned money as though it were theirs to keep while they were sitting in our house and eating our meals. Jake attempts to act as a mediator. Perhaps they're right. You mean it's simply a loan? We could assist. Family. The word Jake almost strangled me. We made a decision when. We're supposed to support your parents' aspirations? The room became quite chilly. Carol, never one to let a dramatic situation pass unexploited. I piped up. I never hear. Anyhow, we believed that family supported one another. However, if you're going to be frugal, stingy? I was seeing red now. Working for what you have isn't being stingy. Carol, it's known as responsibility. Perhaps you ought to give it a go sometime. Despite Frank's best efforts, the harm had already been done. Look, Emma, don't be angry. Here, we are only conversing, speaking, correct? I was unable to conceal my sarcasm. It seems like all we ever discuss is how my family can help you with your issues. I stayed awake that night, looking at the ceiling, after they had finally departed and Jake had apologized to his parents for the mistake. It was more than a simple miscommunication. Two individuals who regarded me as a walking, talking ATM rather than a daughter-in-law completely invaded our life. The birth of our daughter Lily changed the course of our lives. I was a little surprised. You believe that having a grandchild would make people more positive? Not so much with Jake's parents, that is. They must have brought the cheapest onesie from the bargain bin when they arrived at the hospital. The clearance tag was still on it. However, you would have thought that World War III was going to break out in that hospital room when my parents arrived with a gorgeous hand knit blanket and other excellent baby stuff. They're really putting on a show, aren't they? Looking over the presents with a mixture of jealousy and contempt, Carol joked. Tossing money around must be pleasant. That rather than all this nonsense, they might have simply bought you a house. Jake laughed and added his voice. You see, Mom has a point. Your parents certainly don't hide a residence that may have been more useful. All they could speak about was how my parents should have spent their money, which made my heart sink as I held our newborn. It hurt. Hearing Jake repeat what his mother said, did they see our daughter as nothing more than a cash sign? I repressed my mounting rage and attempted to maintain harmony. Well, the price tag isn't the point, is it? The notion is what matters. Frank, however, wasn't going to let it go. Yes, of course, yes. However, when you consider it, it's a pleasant little real estate investment. It's a gift that never stops giving. It was a stressful trip home from the hospital. Jake attempted to patch things up by claiming that his parents were just archaic and had no intention of doing so. However, the seed was sown. I began to question why Jake had actually married me. Was the primary attraction my family's bank account, or was it love? During one of their unannounced trips a few weeks later, Carol brought it up once more. With Lily squirming in my arms and us all squeezed into our living room, Carol couldn't help but make fun of the new pram my mother had purchased for us. Having your parents give Lily all these pricey toys and technology must be great. However, don't you believe it would have been more beneficial to contribute to a housing fund? The passive-aggressive tone permeated her voice as she spoke. I had learnt to fear. Jake nodded as he sat next to his mother. We've actually been conversing, sweetie. Instead of giving us more baby items, perhaps your folks might give us a down payment. Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? I was blown away. In addition to his parents' unrelenting demands, Jake now supported using the birth of our daughter as leverage to get financial advantage. I had the impression that I was living in a warped world where financial prosperity was more important than family and love. For you, Jake, is that what this is about? Stealing money from my parents? My voice betrayed the hurt I was feeling. I believed that we were all on the same page, for better or worse, not for the wealthy or the poor. Carol only sniffed, but Jake was surprised. It makes sense to consider these factors when your wife's parents are wealthy. After they eventually departed, I lay awake, looking at the ceiling. Lily slept beside me. I was struck by the realization. My family, my marriage. To them, it was all a deal. And the money was me. To put it mildly, the past few years have been quite the roller coaster. Lily's turned into a feisty little 3-year-old, full of life and fun. However, life presented us with some unexpected turns that I did not anticipate. Mom did it first. It was an unexpected accident. We're all shocked. I was so distraught that I was hardly able to pull myself together for Lily. But Jake, he wasn't asking me how I was doing at first. No. Yes, it was. How much do you receive from your mothers then? Okay, it felt like a smack in the face. Even my mother wasn't chilly. In accordance with Mom's wishes, he was vulture-like examining her inheritance. I inherited the chain of barbershops. I had no business management experience, but Jake was ready to give his skills. Babe, let me handle this. You know I've got a talent for business, he said, beaming and full of confidence. I let him take over because I was too distraught to protest. However, I ensured that the ownership document remained in my name. I hoped that he would be able to help us get back on track. Then, Dad died of a heart attack just a year later. Something inside of me was broken by losing both of my parents so quickly. Jake could only discuss what we would inherit from Dad, even though I needed him more than ever. The day following Dad's death, Jake's folks came over. I anticipated maybe a sliver of dignity, a moment of respect for my loss. However, no. They immediately started making assumptions about Dad's riches. Emma must thus be quite wealthy, Frank responded, almost able to control his joy. Coming your way. Red caught my eye. For once, please refrain from discussing money. The words exploded out of me like shrapnel as I yelled. Carol put on her most insulted expression. No, I never do. All we care about is the future of the family. You don't have to be impolite. As usual, Jake attempted to mediate the situation. They just want to know. As you might imagine, it's a huge thing, I echoed, my voice increasing. Jake, all you and your folks can worry about is making money now that my parents are gone. To you, is that all I am? A bank? There was silence in the room. A knife might easily cut through the strain. Jake muttered a pathetic apology after glancing at me, and then at his parents. But the harm was done. I couldn't tolerate the sight of them, their selfishness, their total lack of humanity. Get out! I spoke in a steady but icy tone. Carol was left grumbling to herself. Frank frowned. Jake lingered, attempting to rationalize his parents' actions. However, I had finished listening. Jake bursts through the doorway earlier than normal, 2 days after my dad passed away. I have some fantastic news, darling. He barely controls his excitement as he beams at me. I've made an agreement to sell the hairdressing chain. Is it not unbelievable? My jaw nearly hit the floor. What? What did you do? Not even asking me? I was furious, experiencing a mixture of disbelief and betrayal. Before we really got started, his parents arrived, eager to celebrate like if we had won the lottery. They brought up this feast from some posh restaurant and a bunch of pamphlets that screamed high roller. Carol was beaming as she waved those pamphlets at me. You know what, honey? We put down a deposit on a beach property and sold the existing unit. All of us are relocating to the seashore. I gazed at her, feeling like I was imprisoned in some awful dream. Wait a moment. What are you? I was not questioned about relocating. With the winds and all the heat, I don't want to live beside the beach. With a child. Have you gone insane? Carol just waved off my concerns like I was talking about the weather. Oh, don't you worry about it. We have a cruise arranged as well. You ought to accompany us. It will be amazing. From where is this money coming? I questioned my skinny patience. Well, sweetheart, money is irrelevant now that your father has died and the salons have been sold. We're ready for life now. Consider it. Yachts, private jets. The dream is being lived by us. Carol's eyes were nearly glowing with money signs. I looked at Jake in complete bewilderment. Why are we even discussing the sale of my mother's company once more? And, darling, what's this bullshit about being prepared for life? It makes sense. It will be too much to handle 2 companies. We must concentrate on what will provide more profits. For our future, that is. For the future of our daughter. What I was hearing was unbelievable. The boldness, the greed. It was just too much. Show me the financials for the salon, I insisted. Before we make any hasty decisions, I want to see everything. Jake writhed and avoided seeing. It all comes down to our future and ensuring our comfort. His parents joined the chorus, encouraging me to just let go and enjoy the windfall. But all I saw when I looked at them were vultures circling. Why is there such a hurry to sell the hair salons? I pressed, wanting Tom to answer. Jake gave a shrug, the image of phony rationality. Look, sweetie, after your father has left, it just doesn't make sense to juggle both enterprises. We were able to concentrate on what generates greater revenue. In contrast to the salons, the vehicle oil thing is a treasure trove. At this, his parents became alert and offered their $0.02. Think about it, darling. You could be able to live in luxury if you sell those small stores. You don't need to spend time on them. With a voice full of greed, his mother called. My skin crawled as I saw them nearly drooling over my wealth. Now I want you to go. With a solid voice and a greater resolve, I said, "We should be grieving for my father now, not rejoicing in his legacy." Jake attempted to speak, but I interrupted him. "And something else. I inherited this. We are discussing mine. You have no say in this, nor do your parents." When they realized I wasn't the pushover, the air became icy. They believed I was. With stronger scowls and hefty stride, they departed, leaving me to think about the alone struggle that was ahead. The daybreak following my father's burial discovered me in a state of sadness. The world around me dimmed to a boring gray. Jake made the decision to bring his own brand of color back into our lives at that point. During a cardboard tasting breakfast, he set out to accomplish his goals. "We must immediately schedule a meeting with your father's company's founders," Jake said, his voice like a dagger cutting through the silence. I halted a slice of bread halfway to my lips and glanced at him. "My father was just buried, Jake. Can't we wait?" It takes me a while to take it all in." With a wave of his hand, he dismissed my worries. "Time is money, sweetheart. We must move quickly." I contacted our family lawyer in frustration and in search of clarification, requesting an overview of my father's business activities and a breakdown of the barbershop chain's current situation, information that I believed would provide me with a foundation. After a month that passed in a haze of financial documents and legalese, Jake and his parents returned to our home. Without even saying hello, they were all brimming with unwanted advice and proposals laced with greed. Jake jumped right in. "I've been thinking, I'd be a great leader for your dad's business." His accusation was so outrageous that I couldn't even speak. He wasn't finished, though. "I'll also require a new vehicle, something reminiscent of a business magnate." Before I could even come up with an answer, the newest BMW ought to solve the problem. Carol jumped in with her own absurd requests. "The seaside home is nearly ready. All we have to do is add $300,000 more, plus some for deer and furnishings. I anticipate that you will create an account for me. I need to keep my lifestyle after all." I understood what I had to do after hearing their incessant requests. It was like a switch flicked inside me. The divorce papers will no longer be held like a shield by Mrs. Neese. I moved ahead, cutting through their conversation. "We must speak, Jake." Placing the papers on the coffee table in front of him, I made the announcement. His face wrinkled into a scowl as he scooped them up. "So what is this?" He tried to seem casual, but his voice was tremulous. "Divorce paperwork." Every word I spoke was intentional. "I understand." "Jake, I've got the company audited. It has been driven into the ground by you. Because of your administration, it is on the verge of collapse." His face drained of color. A culpable youngster exposed in deception. I was attempting to improve it. His reasons were as weak as his confidence as he stammered. "Improve it by letting go of our best employees and ignoring the main factors that contributed to the company's success." Fueled by a mixture of betrayal and wrath, I raised my voice. "Always the meddler," Carol couldn't help but step in. "Let's not forget that he has the right to half of everything, sweetheart. After all, assets are bound by marriage." I couldn't help but chuckle, but there was no joy in it. "Nice effort. But everything's been in my name since before I made the horrible mistake of marrying your son. I don't give him anything." There was silence in the room. They were taken aback. Their entire plan is falling apart. "And another thing," I said, gazing Jake down, "you will repay all of the money. You've caused the company to suffer. Each and every dime." Jake's response to the divorce's reality was to grovel frantically, begging me to change my mind. "Please, can't we discuss this? There must be an alternative," he pleaded. Desperation crackled in his voice. Not to be surpassed in terms of drama, his parents began their own heartfelt performance. They bemoaned the fact that they had invested all of their money in the now fragile beachfront home. "Without the next installment, everything will be lost for us," his mother wailed, her tears streaming freely. "Please think of what this means for us." My heart hardened by their past behavior. I listened, feeling nothing but icy indifference to their situation. "That's your mess. I'm sorry." I spoke in an unflinching tone. With renewed determination, I led them to the door and shut it, and this phase of my life. I tried not to think about the past in the days that followed. Instead, I sold the flat where Jake and I used to live and concentrated on the future. Just enough money was raised from the sale to buy a charming, inviting home that would give my daughter and I a fresh start. As soon as I walked inside our new house, I felt relieved, at ease, and able to assist us in a way that had been lacking for far too long. The legal system moved slowly but steadily, and when Jake was eventually apprehended, he was told to make up for the damage he had caused to the hairdresser chain. The courts decided that his carelessness had a cost, and in order to pay his debts, he had to sell his portion of our former flat. For once, seeing him held responsible seemed like a bittersweet justification of the suffering he had caused us. One day, my ex-mother-in-law was on the other end of my phone when it suddenly rang, her voice tinged with desperation. "We're stuck. To acquire a property, we need assistance. Any sum would be beneficial." I was astounded by her audacity as she begged. I inhaled deeply to gather my thoughts before answering. "You made your bed," I said in a firm, determined tone. "You should lie in it now." Calling off. A mix of feelings rushed over me, fury at their ongoing attitude of entitlement, but also a profound sense of release from their grasp. Life eventually began to improve after everything that transpired, including the divorce and the struggle to regain control of my mom's hair salon business. It was a challenging struggle, but gradually the salons began to recover their previous spark. It was a triumph to get back the best stylists we had lost. Seeing them return through those doors, prepared to return to our chairs and work their spell, the scene seemed to spring to life once again. It turned out that I was more suited for the corporate sector than I had thought. Each day was a new lesson, a fresh surprise about what I could do if it hadn't been for being cornered by life's harsh twists. I might never have unearthed this aspect of me. For the time being, managing my dad's cartwheel company was just another challenge. I made the decision to hire a manager to guide the ship while I regained my bearings. I made it plain that I was still in charge and told him, "It's all yours for now, but keep me in the loop. Maybe at the age of 20, once Lily is old enough. If she's interested, I'm considering giving it to her. I want her to have choices so she may follow her own path." Meanwhile, I'm sinking my toes into it, learning the ropes. Lily and I were alone in our new house, which was a peaceful place, an entirely different world from the chaos we had left behind. Yes, it was little, but it belonged to us. A location where we could develop, recover, and create something new. There was laughing everywhere. Every crevice holds a memory we created in the garden together. I felt so much better after hearing Lily giggle. "Mommy, I want to be like you when I grow up." With awe and admiration in her eyes, she would say, "You will become even more remarkable." In response, I would draw her into an embrace. I sensed deep down that we were on the threshold of something fantastic. Together, we were unstoppable, with hopeful hearts and wide arms prepared to face whatever was ahead.